Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode of The Owl's Nest, bringing you a bird's eye view of all the action happening in the Overwatch League. Jake, thanks for joining me as always.
Happy to be here. It's going to be an exciting week.
That's right. So obviously we all are all still in self-quarantine, hopefully. Hope everyone out there is still staying safe and doing what you can to self-isolate. This week on the show, of course, we're going to look at takeaways from last weekend. We're going to forecast a little bit more about the future of some of the upcoming, or the future of some of the teams, and I don't necessarily want to say upcoming. Today we're going to take a look at both the Washington Justice and the Paris Eternal. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about a match of the week and how those new hero pool rules are working out for us. So to start out with, of course, talking about last weekend, where I'd like to begin is with the always entertaining Battle of Los Angeles, the LA Gladiators and the LA Valiant duking it out and going all the way to a Game 5 here. Now, Jake, I think the biggest thing that I'd like to get your opinion on here before we sort of dive into the match is, as I was watching throughout this, it seemed like the casters weren't really keen on KSP's Ashe, and they felt like it was probably holding them back a little bit. But again, it was a close game regardless. What are your thoughts on the Ashe pick?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's out of the question this week. I think there were a couple times when they were playing Ashe when I thought that it didn't really fit into the overall strategy. But that's also the reality of hero pools that, if you can't play McCree and Widow, there's probably some circumstances where KSP would have definitely preferred to play McCree. And then he's on Ashe, but of course, it's the hero pool, so you have to make choices with limited pool. I think honestly, it's not that bad of a pick, and I think also some of the Chinese teams made it work and made it look pretty good, although in different situations. I think it's not too bad in my opinion. Like I don't think it's like a really bad pick or really unwinnable, especially given the hero pool. I don't love the overall strategy because I think it makes you run Mercy a little too consistently. And I think that hero is actually more of a significant problem for the overall game plan in terms of not offering as much as the other choices on the support line, but still feeling a bit necessary to make Ashe as effective as you want her to be. So it's kind of it's a little bit all in terms of like the Ashe has to have a really particularly great performance to succeed. I don't know. I don't hate the decision. I don't think it's wrong necessarily. I probably would have not wanted to do that, if I were the Valiant, if I were making the calls. But I don't think we can say that it's like just the reality of hero pools is that I don't think you can say that the pick is like incorrect just because there's not enough optimization time to determine what's truly correct. And if KSP's been having great performances in scrims on this hero, then I don't see why you would change that for the match. I think it's good that they still had confidence in him. I'm guessing if they're running this comp, KSP probably has been having really good Ashe games and scrims. So from that perspective, I don't disagree with the pick at all.
So what do you think was it that gave the Gladiators a little bit more of an edge in this game? Do you think that maybe KSP just wasn't quite performing up to where they thought that he would be, or was it something particular that the Gladiators did?
Well, it's a super close match, right? So I don't know if we can say that it's like one player really making the difference here. I think it is, when it comes to a Game 5, it always just comes down to those little moments in, each map in the series that, determine those maps. And usually those just break down to, like, better team play in the clutch. I think one of the realities of Ashe as a hero is she doesn't really offer much to the team play aspect. She's pretty much all damage all the time, which can be an asset, but sometimes when you get down to those brawly last fights, then, Bob is pretty effective, but there's not really anything else in Ashe's kit that's so effective in closing those out. I think once you start to lose teammates and, like, if your Mercy's down and your shield tanks start dropping, or they can't protect you anymore, then Ashe can kind of really struggle. She wants to be playing in a 6-on-6 engagement and getting the first pick and using the dynamite on grouped up enemy heroes. And when those things aren't really presenting themselves anymore, then Ashe can feel pretty weak. I don't know that I would say that that's the reason, but I just think that maybe adds a snowball effect too. If anybody makes a mistake and falls, then maybe Gladiators are a little bit better positioned to take advantage of it given the strategy they're running.
Well, the other match I want to take a look at this week, probably one of the bigger upsets of the week, the Florida Mayhem going up against the Paris Eternal and delivering a full 3-0 sweep here. The Paris Eternal is one that we've been watching all throughout this season, kind of waiting for them to really hit their stride and really sort of get over that hump and become one of the top teams here that a lot of people, I think, know that they have the potential to be. Jake, what do you think happened here? What led to the Florida Mayhem 3-0ing the Paris Eternal?
I mean, this is a huge upset. I almost can't speak to exactly why this happened. I think it's just that level of upset where it's totally out of left field. Florida's been having a pretty tough season, maybe having some better moments than they've had in past seasons, but still, it's been tough for them to be sure. And Paris is kind of the exact opposite. They've been just constantly succeeding. So maybe Paris getting a little bit overconfident, maybe not preparing as well as they could have this week, because Florida just looked really, really great. I mean, 3-0 speaks for itself. And as I recall, some of these maps were not actually that close, which I think, is a huge surprise for the Paris Eternal and their fans. I will say that XZ not off McCree and Widow definitely hurts them. I think he's actually also really good at heroes like Tracer and Hanzo, but I do think that they've looked at their best with XZ on McCree, playing a comp that lets them group up around him, and other heroes don't offer that same sort of focal point for your team. So maybe that took Paris off their stride just a little bit. They have looked, in my opinion, not as strong on the really brawly compositions or on dive strategy. I think their best strat is a McCree, Rhine, Diva sort of situation. So maybe it could be the hero pool kind of taking them off their stride, but there's really there's no way to explain away losing 3-0 to one of the teams that's been having a really rough season, especially for Paris, that I feel has been wanting to prove themselves as one of the best teams in the league, and I've been thinking of them as on the cusp of that. So this is really a setback for Paris.
Well, they'll have at least a week to try and get their bearings back together. I do believe, looking at the schedule here, that they have this next week off. Florida Mayhem, of course, looks like they have a pretty easy week up against the Boston Uprising, but, any given payload, so we'll see how that ends up going. Now, the other match that I wanted to take a look at here was another nearly upset, and that was the Dallas Fuel taking the San Francisco Shock all the way to a Game 5. Now, they actually played, I believe it was Week 1 at the start of the season, where the Shock did beat the Fuel 3-1, but it wasn't looking as much of a blowout as I think a lot of people thought that it would, and if this trend continues every time the Shock go up against the Dallas, they might eventually have a win over them. What was it that you saw out of Dallas, or that you didn't see out of the Shock, that you think led to such a close match between the two of them?
I think Decay and especially the tank line and Decay, I think, played especially well for Fuel. I think Doha had ridiculously huge games as well. So I mean, I think honestly this Dallas, these new pickups for Dallas have been a huge difference maker. Starting with Note halfway through last season, then picking up Gamsu.
I was so happy to see those two get back together on this team.
Yeah, and I think that's such a power combo. Great pickups by the Fuel. And then you add Decay and Doha to that, two of the best DPS players in the league right now. And I think this season, I'm only surprised from the perspective of the beginning of the season. I'm only surprised that the Fuel didn't do even better. But maybe now is the time for them to really come into full stride, because I think they've got the roster to compete at the top at this moment in time. And it just hasn't exactly materialized for them so far. But it's not been an abject failure. They've been getting wins. They've been keeping themselves in playoff contention. So I think as time goes on for this roster, given that there's a lot of big changes on the roster, so they have to readjust and get used to each other and build that synergy that you need to compete at the highest level. But at the same time, once they get there, this match is proof that they can compete with anybody. I mean, yes, they lose 3-2. Doesn't go their way in the end, but I think probably in the sense of it being an upset, I don't think people would have predicted it to go to Game 5. I think people would have thought the Shock had a bigger edge on the Fuel. So if anything, this just shows how close this season is. And, if you get a moderately favorable hero pool, you can take on anybody. So I think, especially for the Dallas Fuel, I think of as a team pretty resilient to hero pools, just because Doha and Decay have really broad individual hero pools that enable them to support most strategies that you would want to run with 2 DPS. Same for Gamsu and Note. Honestly, everyone on this roster has been looking pretty solid, so pretty impressed by them. But of course, Dallas, they've got to be able to do it in map 5, you know?
So then the only other question that I have for you, and the thing that's sort of been plaguing my mind, is we haven't been seeing a whole lot of Sinatra this season. Do you have any thoughts about why he might be riding the bench?
I don't know. It's tough to speculate on something like that. Part of it is just the reality of the shock. Is like Sinatra, like with Zarya, obviously dominating Goat's meta, and that being one of Sinatra's best heroes now, and then Doomfist dominating the playoff meta. It made total sense for Sinatra to be a permanent fixture on the starting lineup, right? But it's kind of the curse of having such an insane stacked DPS lineup. Like, I mean, like none of the other DPS on Shock are insanely good, you know. So sitting on the bench for Striker or Rascal or Architect is like not surprising, you know. Like these players are insane. So, you know, from the Shock side, it's just the reality that like you have to bench 2 insanely good DPS players every single time you play, unless you want to play Sinatra on Zarya or something, or you know, one of your DPS on off tank. But yeah, then you're competing with Choi Hyobin. Okay, so it's just like brutal for this team. I mean, they have to be benching insanely talented players that would start on virtually any other team, just because of the reality of their roster. Like, you know, it's a blessing and a curse to have this many strong players. You just can't use them all. Like it's just not realistic. And maybe in an ideal meta, but with the meta shifting so much week to week. Maybe I definitely could imagine seeing Sinatra come back in later as like a Tracer or Doomfist specialist, but Doomfist really hasn't been in the meta much, and Tracer, you know, here and there maybe, but not particularly in a dominant position. And even for Tracer, then like a Striker is also a monster on Tracer. So for Sinatra, you know, it's not even clear that I think he would be the starter in that role. I do think they're both insanely talented, but I think it really is more of a stylistic preference for the coaching staff deciding who they would want to start for that role. So for the Shock, I think that's just the reality, right? Like you've got to bench insanely good players, and there's no way around it.
Well, it's a good problem to have, probably, when you look at it. Anyway, guys, we'd love to know what you guys hear. We value your opinions. Let us know what you think. Leave us comments on YouTube, Twitter. Find us at CheckpointXP on Twitter and Facebook. You can also find Jake over at JakeOW. Coming up next, we're going to forecast what the rest of the season might look like for the Washington Justice and the Paris Eternal. That's coming up next.
Hey, what's up? It's Weirdbeard from CheckpointXP, and this is your CSL flashback. We're flashing it back to the near past for the 2019-2020 regional qualifiers for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, where Rush takes on AIM-D with his Meta Knight versus Fox.
You can't really challenge Wolf Up B as Meta Knight.
No! As soon as you said that,
there we go. All right.
You cursed him.
I did.
You cursed him.
I did.
He didn't even hit him. He windboxed him.
That's pretty entertaining.
That's
okay.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Owl's Nest. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to get us on the go, you can also download an audio-only version of the show on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is that you find your podcasts. Go and look for the Owl's Nest, and leave us a review if you have some time as well. So we started last week, and over the next few weeks, we're going to take 2 teams every middle segment here on the Owl's Nest that have about 9 to 10, about a third of their season now under wraps, and kind of talk about what we've seen so far, what we'd like to see out of them, and where they're probably going to end up come the end of the season. And I'd like to start with the Washington Justice, a team that I have to say, coming into the season and seeing where we are now, I'm actually pretty disappointed in. They had a phenomenal Stage 4 last season with Corey leading the charge mostly on Hanzo. Jake, initial thoughts about the Washington Justice, where you thought they might be, and why they've kind of settled down into the bottom of the standings.
Yeah, I mean, I think I share your surprise and a bit of disappointment for this team. I think the pickups in the offseason in particular were really significant. I think getting Roar, Elevote, these are huge pickups, I think, for them. And I always felt like it was the tank line for the Justice that needed the biggest help. And I thought Roar would be that help in particular. I thought he had a particularly great performance last season. But yeah, Corey's having good games. Stratus and Tuba doing well to be his counterpart in combo with him. But this team just not really coming together. I think maybe it still feels a bit like the Corey show watching them play, and I think they need to move beyond that in order to become a truly top team. Like they cannot succeed in the Overwatch League relying on individual playmaking, right? And I think individual playmaking obviously is important, but as soon as it becomes what your team relies on and it becomes your default, then you're going to struggle because it's just not going to happen every single match. And if it happens every single match, it won't happen every single map. You just can't rely on 100% because the very best teams in the world have 6 players who are just as good at playmaking as you are, but maybe they're also going to play in a more coordinated fashion. And it just feels like Washington Justice, they haven't been able to pull it together in that same way. They haven't been able to find that same success. So it must be frustrating, I think, for these players. And I think for a player like Corey, it's also the reality that, yes, he's a really, really strong player, but nobody can be on top of the meta forever, especially given hero pools. Corey's pretty flexible, which should protect him for the most part, but it also might make it more difficult for the team to make the adjustments needed to, be that coordinated force around him, rather than just, doing their best for on the playmaking side. But I mean, the team's had good matches. It's been close over and over again, so I don't want to rag on them too much. I don't think they're a bad team. I don't think they have no potential. I think it's kind of just been that clutch factor maybe that differentiates other teams over them. But yeah, it just kind of feels like they haven't advanced as much in the offseason as I would have hoped. Like it hasn't been like with what we saw in stage 4, it was clear the potential was there. And it was pretty impressive too to see that like rally despite, having already the season already gone so wrong. But then I just feel like we haven't seen that same level of energy in the fresh season. And it's I know how hard it is to be a player, and how hard it is to keep outputting that level of energy and that level of focus, for months and months on end, especially this season with all of its unique challenges. But yeah, it's definitely been a struggle for the Washington Justice. I'm not sure exactly what they need to do to fix it. At the end of the day, I think probably the most significant factors are going to be like the leadership on the team. So whoever is main calling for them, I don't know exactly who that is though. Who's leading? Is it Arc? Is it Corey or Stratus? So I think maybe that is a key factor in terms of the coordination in the team. I think that is, in my opinion, their issue though. I don't think there's a player skill issue here.
All right. Well, again, they're only about a third of the way through. They are currently 2-8, so I'm not a math guy, but I don't think that completely necessarily counts them out. But unfortunately, Washington fans, it's not looking too good. Now, the other side of that, a team that does still have a chance, that is still looking pretty good, is the Paris Eternal. Currently sitting 8th seed with a 5-4 record. Not terrible by any means. But again, we talked last segment about how they seem to sort of be on this cusp between really being great, and then we see matches like they had against the Florida Mayhem where they get clean swept. So what do you think is it that the Eternal have as their strengths here, and what seems to be holding them back in some of these situations where they don't seem to be able to follow through in the way that most people expect them to?
Well, I mean, I think they've had a great season so far. Actually, didn't XC have to go back to Korea or something?
I think, yeah, he's currently on inactive roster. I read that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So
How much of a
I mean,
detriment do you think that's going to be to the team?
I can't pin it on one person, to be honest, or it's never one person, but I do think XE has been the clear superstar for this team. I feel like he's been starting permanently when he's around. So without him, they're definitely just weaker. Frankly, I think Soon and Nico are both great players, but I do think XE has been really the leader in terms of just impressive playmaking on this roster. So I think, I would love to see Stoon getting play time. Same for Nico. But I both would want to see them partnered up with XE, when the situation is right, when the hero pool lines up for it. But I think without XE and Sparkle still being underage, those are really big limiting factors for the Paris Eternal. And if anything for Paris Eternal, I think their mindset just needs to be survive. Like, get a few wins, keep yourself in playoff contention. When you can field that XE Sparkle DPS lineup, that's going to be terrifying for the other team. I think Sparkle is an insanely talented individual on the come up, a young player. So, has a huge open potential for the future. And I think that DPS combo sounds pretty terrifying. Sounds pretty top of the league terrifying. And I think the rest of the roster, even without Hip, I do think Gray is also a very strong player with a lot of potential as well. So I think this team can easily make playoffs, can easily be one of the best teams in the world come playoff time. But I do think they're hurting without XE and without Sparkle. Two different issues, right? Like XE's, I'm not sure exactly what he's dealing with, but obviously he's of age, so it's just a matter of when those issues can be resolved and he can return to play. And for Sparkle, when he turns 18 and is able to play, which I believe will happen like halfway through the season or something. Both of those things I think would be big boosts for this team. So they've had a fine start so far. Not guaranteed to make playoffs, but they've set themselves up well. And as long as they get a good amount of time for Sparkle and XE, and as long as those players are like playing as expected, they don't even need to go beyond expectations right now, because my expectations are really, really high for these players. So just doing what I think they can do, what their average performance will be, I think if they can just maintain that, they should be great. They should make playoffs and be one of the best teams in the world. If the roster issues continue to plague them, if Sparkle doesn't integrate well into the team, we know he's a youngster with maybe, I don't know if I'd say a hot temper, but he's got definitely like a big personality. We've all seen the stream clips of him like going crazy and screaming and stuff, which, is funny and ranked and is fine. But obviously is pretty unacceptable in my opinion in a professional environment. But you can't say that he is that way in a professional environment, because, those clips are from ranked and he's just having a good time messing around. So, it's only his teammates, I guess, who will know how he is in that professional environment. I'm confident that he can, I don't know him personally, but like most players can make a big adjustment between ranked and professional teams. So it's not to say that he can't do that, but he does need to, right? Like the team needs to, have that professional competitive atmosphere to really succeed. You can't be yelling or anything like that. At least not at the point of the match where it still matters. But, obviously he's a really talented player. He knows that. Understands that. So if this team does what I expect them to do, I think they'll be one of the best teams come playoffs. This week, momentary hiccup in my mind.
Yes, I agree. I'm sure we'll probably be seeing more of the Paris Eternal. Obviously, between those two, the Eternal and the Justice, one definitely has a bit of a brighter future than the other. Up next, we'll discuss how recent hero bans might end up affecting the meta, and how one of the damage heroes kind of got a little bit of a bye this week. That's coming up next.
Knocked one. Scooting up. Knocked another.
Pop on the bat.
They're so weak. Gibraltar's so hurt.
Behind us, self-rising.
Let's fucking go, man. We had the worst position and still won the game.
Sonny's on. Give his knees dead. Hit for 152.
Yes, let's go!
That was intense.
He's dropping to the right.
It's a solo.
Bro, push him together. Bro, let's
Go! Hell yeah, boy!
go, boys! Woo! Because China, at any moment, because of their one-party government system, can flip a switch and say your game is banned. And that.
Uh-oh. Well, Norris froze.
Oh, Norris!
Norris! No!
He's gone!
Oh,
I thought it was my internet.
Yeah, gonna go ahead and pick it up from there from him, though. Oh, wait.
Norris is back. Got
I'm
that Got that that rocket fiber going on down in Detroit.
Rocket Power.
Got that Dan Gilbert internet, man.
Ooh, that was weird.
I thought it was my internet. I nearly panicked. I was like, great.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Owl's Nest. If you haven't already, make sure that you're connecting with us on social media. That's CheckpointXP over on Twitter and Facebook. You can also find Jake at JakeOW. And make sure that you are both following him, and if you can, sub to him over on twitch.tv/Jake_OW. So we're going to start out here on the third segment, is where we always start out here, and that's going to be with the matches of the week. So the first one coming up is a little bit of a rematch from, I believe it was last week or the week before. Getting them a little mixed up there. Everything during the quarantine starting to blur together. But the Atlanta Reign and the Philadelphia Fusion, once again, going to go head-to-head. I believe the Reign took the Fusion to a Game 5 last time. So, Jake, I have to know, do you think that the Fusion are going to be able to stay on top of their game, or do you think that someone might finally get, well, I guess it would be the second win over the Fusion, but might finally put the brakes on them?
Well, I mean, you know, you have to look at this match going in and just predict Philly to win just because they are the top team in the region right now, arguably the top team in the entire league right now. So I wouldn't predict anybody over them. But, you know, Reign have shown time and time again that they have the mental fortitude to focus on themselves, focus on their own gameplay, and not let their opponent's strength get to their head. So this has been a team that has been a bit of a giant slayer in the past. So I think very possible they could be that David once again here against Philly. At the same time, you know, as I said, like I would still predict Philly Fusion to win. I still think that they'll be able to get away with this one just because, you know, all of the reasons they've won so many times so far in the season, right? Like for them, it's just a question of doing it again. For Reign, it's a question of, can we make this a possibility? Can we somehow find a way to defeat them? So still, you know, you got to favor Philly in this matchup, but I like Atlanta's chances, and I also love seeing them take on a top team because they play without fear, and that's a really important thing to be having as a roster. It shows that Reign are going to be a consistent competitor regardless of the meta and stuff, because even if they know they're unfavored going into a match, I don't see them crumbling. I don't see them falling apart. Those aren't their issues, and those are like the worst, most critical issues to have as a team, I think, whereas like obviously going against top teams, you know, you're not always going to win, but for the Reign, they seem to like play with confidence no matter what, and then I think that really makes a difference and makes it a lot more fun to watch them. So this is definitely a match of the week for me.
And I think the one that I'm more excited about, this is happening Sunday morning, so I'll probably catch it on the VODs, but Seoul Dynasty versus the Shanghai Dragons. Obviously, Shanghai is still riding pretty high, 6-1. You know, we have some analysts saying that they may even be the top seed right now, or top of the power rankings, even above the Philadelphia Fusion. They'll be going up against the Seoul Dynasty, who we've only seen play, I believe, 2 matches here so far. They're technically our first seed at 2-0. So I have to know, Jake, you know, these two going up against one another, great lineups on both sides. What are you predicting or hoping to see out of this match?
I mean, this is one you definitely don't want to miss. Shanghai has, just watching them play, casting them a few times, they've been so impressive to me. This team, you know, it's hard to say, you know, the competition between regions right now because the reality of the current situation is that, you know, the league's been a bit regionalized, at least for the moment. But Shanghai has been looking so coordinated, so sophisticated as a team, just really, really impressing me with their executions. They're really sharp, and they're not only on an individual level are they sharp, but their team play has been nigh perfect. I mean, really, really beautiful executions coming out from them while casting have literally just left me open mouthed with just how precise they are and how quick they make their moves and how, you know, decisive they are, which is so critical in Overwatch. They just look like one unit when they play as a team, which is very hard to do, not so simple to get to that level. Whereas Seoul Dynasty also have been looking incredibly powerful. We haven't seen nearly as much from them, so I kind of like Shanghai's chances, but I'm very hesitant to be confident in that. I'm not confident at all, in fact, because Seoul has been really, really great from what we've seen of them. It's just that they haven't been able to play, you know, so many matches. So definitely a huge match for Seoul. They want to keep, you know, be 3-0. It would be a tragedy for a team like Seoul for how well they played to be 2-1. But then again, I think once they get more matches under their belt, I don't think there's many teams that I do think will take wins off them. So even if Shanghai does it, I'm not worried about Seoul's overall season, but also vice versa. I think both of these teams will be top playoff contenders come the end of the season. So awesome to see them match up right now.
Another important match to keep an eye on this weekend, as the regional rivalries always seem to be some of the best matches. That's going to be the Dallas Fuel versus the Houston Outlaws in the battle for Texas. Now, both of them are kind of on the rise. Dallas sitting at 17 with at 2 and 4, and the Houston Outlaws 15th seed, 4 and 6. But both have kind of, sort of been struggling to get back on that horse. How are you going to call this match? Who do you think has a little bit of the edge here, especially keeping in mind, what some of the hero bands are this week?
It's really interesting this week, I think. Honestly, Dante is so good at Echo. I think when that hero comes into the pool, I think Dante is going to be a monster on it after playing with him in the Echo tournament this past weekend. But obviously,
congratulations on your win, by the way.
Oh yeah, thanks. It was a lot of fun, a lot of good time to play with my old teammate, and also a lot of other cool folks on the team. But getting back into this match, I do think this is going to be a pretty exciting one. I think hero pool, in my mind, doesn't really play too much of a factor this week. I think both teams get hurt by the Tracer ban. I think Decay likes to play Tracer in weird situations, but Dante as well, also a monster on the Tracer. So, I think that's, I'd say, about even in terms of what it costs each team. I don't think either team particularly loves playing Orisa. Maybe Crimzo is a little bit more partial to the Moira than Raucus or Repel, but not significantly. So maybe I feel like I'm just overanalyzing it to get deep into the hero pool as far as this week. Ultimately, I think this is going to be a true test of both teams. Dallas has been looking really, really strong recently, but also failing to clinch it in some crucial games, which I'm sure has worn on their mentality just a little bit. Outlaws as well, having a really bad start to the season, turning it around, and now once again feeling a bit of headwinds, but time will tell, I guess, whether those headwinds are long term or just a momentary mistakes on the way back to a restorative season. Man, who's gonna have the edge here? This is really tough to call. I think. I guess I'll just take the team bias and give it to my boys, give it to the Outlaws. I think they've been looking really, really great as a coordinated team. I feel like the roster has been utilized really intelligently recently. I guess for me, it depends a lot on how the meta breaks down this week. If we see a ton of McCree, I have to give Decay the edge on that. I think he might be the best McCree player in the match. But at the same time, I think the team play from Outlaws might actually be a little bit better, especially with the Moira ban. With I think Dallas best looks have been full Zerg rushing strategies, full brawling with Ryan and Moira, and heroes that want to stay right on top of those players. Decay looked really, really great on the McCree, but he also looked really, really great on the McCree while their team lost pretty hard early in the season. He was a superstar then too against teams like Valiant and Shock, and it just wasn't enough. So it's not clear that will be the deciding factor in this match, even though I do think he'll definitely have a great performance, as he seems to always do. But yeah, I guess full team bias mode, I'll give it to the Outlaws. It's just too close to call, so I'll just go to that.
Yeah, and as the proud owner of 2 Jake jerseys, a Dante jersey, and wearing one in Animal Crossing, I'm not going to argue with you on that. The final thing that I wanted to actually touch on here, and just to get your initial thoughts on it, is the hero bans this week, of course, Orisa, Moira, Tracer, and Echo, who isn't actually in the Overwatch League professional play just yet. But of course, because of the new rules, where they also take into account what's been played at the top of the ladder in a competitive retail version, that now affects what ends up being banned out in professional play as well. Do you have any thoughts on that? The fact that technically only 1 DPS has really been banned out for professional play this week?
Well, I mean, I think it's a little sad to see Echo out of the pool. I was pretty excited to see her played, but I also think this hero might need some tuning. I think I'm surprised she actually hasn't already been a little bit tuned down. I think she's been maybe just a little too dominant in the long run. Just getting a little too much value. But too soon to say. Also, McCree was banned last week, which I think is a really strong hero against Echo. I don't know how I feel about this week's hero pool, to be honest. Good things, bad things. I love seeing Orisa and Moira banned. That's one thing I really like. I'm not too big of a fan of either of those heroes, so those are big pluses. Tracer being out of the pool seems a bit weird, but I guess that's just adapting to the new system where ranked has impact. Tracer didn't really see much play at all in pro play. I mean, she sees a little. She's always going to see a little bit of play. She's just such a unique hero with, a really strong kit in the right circumstances. But that kit just hasn't been that strong recently. I think without Moira, actually, Tracer might be really, really strong this week. So it's a little bit unfortunate that we don't get to see her at full power. I think if you ban those really elusive supports, as well Orisa being one of the most resilient tanks against Tracer, then I think just not really caring about the pulse bomb and whatnot, and Moira being so difficult to kill as you can just fade out of your sticky bomb and whatnot. But yeah, so I think the hero pool this week is probably just brings us back to that original meta we saw before hero pools came into favor, which I think is actually kind of exciting. Instead of that style of gameplay going for weeks and weeks and weeks. Now it's actually a circumstance where we haven't seen it in a while, so it feels fresh again, and I actually want to see, who's better at the McCree, Ryan, Diva, Mei strategy. And maybe Mei won't even be that good anymore with the recent nerfs. Tough to call. But, yeah, I think it's a good week for hero pools, honestly. I think the Orisa and Moira bans really are going to make the game fresh and exciting again. I think we're going to see a ton of Ana gameplay, a ton of Lucio, a ton of Ryan. And I think those heroes are always a blast to watch. They just offer such exciting team play opportunities.
All right, well, that's going to be all the time that we have for today. Once again, everyone, we encourage you, connect with us on social media. CheckpointXP on Facebook and Twitter, Robbie_LandisCP, and Jake OW. Make sure you're also checking out CheckpointXP.com. Outside of just the Owl's Nest, we have all kinds of great content over there, from shows to articles and much more. That's going to be it for us tonight, guys. So remember to always stay on that payload.